All right. Welcome, everybody, to the August 18th edition of Wine Stay. We've done almost 26 of them now, which is pretty awesome. Tonight, we've got Jeremy joining us from Three Keys, one of our awesome local wine distributors. My name is Zach. My pronouns are he and him. I'm the wine and beer coordinator at the John Co-op. Tonight, we've got two wines. One is Sophie Bertin Sauvignon Blanc from the Loire Valley, which I'm very excited about. These really nice high acid wines. This 2 wines days ago, we talked about minerality in wines, and I think this presents really, really well, and we'll get into that. And we also have Silvestre Malbec. So nice kind of classic Malbec style. I think kind of, as far as if you're just trying to get into Malbec, then I think this is a really nice option. And last Wednesday on the 4th, we actually talked about a Loire Valley blend of Cote, which is Malbec, and Cab Franc. So kind of old world style. And now we've got this new kind of Argentinian style. But Jeremy, if there's anything you want to add, or if you want me to just jump right into the tech sheets on the Bertin, I can do that. Up to you. Or
yeah. I think these wines are why these wines are special is because they are like authentic. They're classical that way.
Yeah.
The Malbec is Malbec, and the Sauvignon Blanc, even though it is just Vin de France on the label, like it is very much like a Sancerre, for very, for an amazing price point. And so I think these wines are like true, which is nice.
Yeah. So, and that's when I look for wine for the co-op, a lot of times I look for, what's called varietally correct, or, typicity. So something that this is a typical version of what you would get. So if you're at a restaurant or if you're at the co-op and you're looking around the wine shelves and you see Argentinian Malbec or Loire Valley Sauvignon Blanc, then that's what you should expect. And that's one of the kind of markers that I look for. There are some oddballs out there, and I definitely have a soft spot for those too, where we find something that is very, very atypical, not just kind of adjacent, but just totally out of left field to kind of show you what an expression of something else would be. But tonight, I think these are really nice, like spot on, like what you should expect. So if everybody kind of forgot my cheers, which is the whole point of Wine Stay. So cheers, everybody. You can start sipping on our Sophie Bertin Sauvignon Blanc. I'll go ahead and show the tech sheet as well.
Cool. So when you have the map too, yeah?
I do.
So if you can show the map first.
Okay.
And I can sort of chat about like why this wine is special because of where it is.
Sure.
And then we can go over the tasting sheet if that's cool. Just because my time is limited also, again, as you know, but and so if you look at the map, so the Loire Valley is one of the largest wine regions in France.
Mm-hmm.
And it stretches all the way from the Atlantic Ocean all the way into the middle of the country. And if you look at it's basically the Loire River that all of the exciting things are after or around. Sorry. And so at the very end of the Loire Valley, you see Pouilly-Fumé, you see Sancerre. It's all the way out there in the east, to the east.
Yeah, where my cursor currently is, if everybody can see that hot pink area, that is what Jeremy's talking about right now.
What is that? So I can't. Obviously, I'm driving. What is that little gray area just east out there?
That is Chablis.
Perfect. That's exactly what I wanted.
Yep. I knew where you were going.
Yeah. So Chablis is the very most northern part of Burgundy. And so where this wine is coming from is it's actually, and I think it's in the notes there that I gave Zach. It's actually technically in Burgundy. some of the fruit is coming from Burgundy, and some of it is coming from just outside of Sancerre. And so what you're having is this really beautiful, like Sancerre Burgundy-like wine. And it is worth noting that on the other side of Chablis, there is a little area called Saint Brie.
Yep.
And that is where Sauvignon Blanc is allowed in Burgundy, and that's called Sauvignon Saint Brie. So all of this area is very unique that way. Limestone, chalky soils in Chablis, limestone, chalk, and flinty soils in Sancerre. And so all of that kind of showcases in this wine.
Yeah, I definitely get the flint. When you're tasting wine, you're thinking about minerals. It's kind of hard. We talked about this a couple weeks ago, but that's a flavor that we don't normally have in our everyday foods, with the exception of, for me, like shellfish. I think is a really easy marker if you're talking about minerality. I would say some root vegetables might have it, but in general, right now it's nice and hot outside because August in North Carolina. If you were to take like a cup of water and throw it onto the concrete, and that smell, that's an easy way to kind of smell minerals. Another thing that you can do is, like, you can lick a rock if you really want to, but that's not always recommended. But for flint, if you have a lighter around, you can just use the little spin wheel of the lighter, and that will spark, and that is the way that the flint kind of can present itself. And it will obviously be smoky, but you'll get that kind of like that minerally smell to it. If you're trying to figure out what flint is, Polyfumet is very well known for that smokiness in their Sauvignon Blanc. But this is coming right where my cursor is. You can see on the map, coming right from this area. It's like sandwiched between what Jeremy was just saying. So sandwiched between Burgundy and the very end of the Loire Valley. So really great stuff. You can tell like the acidity that it was picked, if not perfectly ripe, just a little early to preserve some of that. And the way that they go about, making this wine is pretty neat. Jeremy, what was that? You said they used Le Raison, or Raisonné?
Lut Raisonné, yeah. So Lut Raisonné, literally, I do think it translates to the good fight.
Yes.
And what that means is, like, they want to be organic and sustainable, but in some years, they might have to spray. And so the good fight, or Lut Raisonné, means that, like, we say the term here, we're sort of teaching my kids this term, doing the best they can, like with what they get dealt with. That's a good Southern way to say some terrible things, but that is, that's what they're doing. Like, they're fighting the good fight. And if it's a really mildewy year, then they will spray. But for the most part, they're doing as much organic as they possibly can.
Yeah. Yeah. And when they do spray, a lot of times they're using sulfites or copper. Copper is a really good thing to fight mildew with. So if you have been in a vineyard and you see these kind of greenish, bluish droplets on leaves, it's a copper spray. It's not, like DEET or something crazy Roundup, that we use here in the States for stuff. But it is, on the edge, and it is, to protect, like people are wine, grape growers, and it's to protect them. If you're going to lose all your crop, and if your crop is your money for the entire next year, you're going to protect that. And that's, but always trying to let the grapes do their very best by themselves, which I think is a pretty cool thing. We've talked about how grapes struggling will produce better fruit. So that kind of ties into the good fight, kind of them doing their best to grow these awesome grapes that then we, get awesome wine.
Absolutely. And, because we're so close to Burgundy, Burgundy is a really interesting place in that from year to year, you could lose 30% of your harvest because of hail damage or any other amount of storms, or, And so when you are fighting the good fight, you're fighting against Mother Nature, who is a beast and really can make or break you as a winery, for sure.
Right. Now, is Sophie, is she a negociant, or what is her role in this?
So she is actually a retailer.
Okay.
And so she has a couple of independent shops, and she and Eric Louis, who is the head winemaker at Domaine Eric Louis, and his great 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 grandmother's estate, Domaine des Paulines. So he's the winemaker, and so he and Sophie are partnering to make a private label wine.
Nice.
So they've had such good success with it, and the importer who imports Eric Louis and Domaine des Paulines sort of roped them out of some Sauvignon Blanc and Rosé for our market, and then it took off. And so last year was their first year, and I think we did the Rosé. Did we do 2020 Rosé?
We did 2019 Rosé.
2019.
And
so
it was a little too early for the 2020, I think, and then it kind of hit and was gone by the time I tried to get it back in the shop.
It was such a huge success that we're trying to get more of what they do. And they do a little Pinot Noir, which I don't know that we see in North Carolina yet.
Okay.
But, Sancerre Rouge is Pinot Noir. And even that little rosé, you mentioned Cot earlier from, Southwest. So, Malbec, that Pinot Noir, that rosé actually had Pinot and Cot in it, if you remember.
Right.
80-20.
Yep. Yeah, and Cot is grown in Loire, so Malbec, which is our second wine tonight. It's known from Bordeaux, a little like Southwest. Cahors is like the namesake and the land of Malbec, but we don't see a ton of them in the States, or if we do, they're not necessarily everyday priced. But it's a really great grape, as we'll get into in a few minutes here. But something that it's fun that we get to taste New World, Old World, south of France, the middle of France, which is what we're in right now, and kind of how different the land and the way things are done in different parts of the world kind of express themselves. We've said this before, but wine is a way that you get to travel without really leaving. You get to experience what people are drinking and eating right in the comfort of your own home. And then, you can kind of get a sense of place, with the whole word terroir. So the whole idea of like what everything that is around the grapes kind of lend to it, kind of mother nature's touch, as well as, the winemaker's finesse. Here is the tech sheet. So tech sheets are what Jeremy and other vendors share with me, so I can get an idea of what is in the bottle without necessarily opening it. Luckily, I do get to try about 99% of the wines on the co-op sales floor. There's a few that I've had in the past that I might not be familiar with the exact vintage, but the hard part of my job, if you will, is meeting with Jeremy and Maggie, and tasting some really great wines. So as you can see, this is 100% Sauvignon Blanc. The flourishes because of the clay and limestone. Clay holds on to water really well. I'm sure most of you are familiar, if you do any kind of gardening in North Carolina, that we have a lot of clay, and how dense and wet it is even after weeks of no rain, where right now if you go and try and shovel, you'll probably be doing some back-breaking work for no real good reason, just because of how wet we've been lately. You can see like gentle press, so that that way the kind of the bitterness of the pips or the wine, the grape seeds don't necessarily go into the wine. They do what's called some cold filtration, so they are making the wine nice and clear just using cold instead of throwing a bunch of stuff in there. And as you can see, it's just nice and bright. It's almost similar to something from New Zealand as far as that zestiness that it has, but then super reserved on the fruit side of things.
Today in my bag, I have a Sancerre, and it resembles New Zealand in flavor. And so when you look at how it's made and the gentle pressing, Sauvignon Blanc is a grape that if you beat it up, it changes its profile. And so I don't know if we've talked about this before. There's a podcast, Guild Somm, which is some of the in the Guild of Master Somms they put out, and there was a chemist on there who discussed Sauvignon Blanc and how 99% of the time in Sancerre it is all hand picked, and how in New Zealand it's all machine harvested. And so that machine harvesting, beating up those grapes, is what gives us that real big grapefruit, that ruby red grapefruit, and the pyrazine, that sort of that green bell pepper that we get sometimes. Right. And so today, having tasted this Sancerre that was machine harvested, then all of that podcast made sense, because it tasted more New Zealand than it did French. It had that really lovely minerality and that limestoney flavor profile, but it did, but it had that real grapefruit on the nose, and it was interesting. What this one doesn't have that's in your glass is it.
Oh, we might have lost you for a second, Jeremy. Let's give him a second, see if he pops. Oh. We can hear you, but you're still a nice little blur on the screen. There we go. All right, you were about to say about the nose difference on the Sancerre.
Yeah, so the nose, so the nose here on the Sophie has that real mineral and lovely, that dirt, gritty, limestoney flavor, and doesn't have that real red ruby grapefruit, pyrazine New Zealand. When you open up a New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, even somebody in the room across the way can go, "Oh, you just opened up New Zealand." But here it's, you get it's French all the way from beginning to end. It's really lovely. I love this wine. I love this wine.
Yeah, I was very excited when we tried the rosé, and then you told me that there was a white as well. It's like, that's what we need. This is great for summertime. As far as the minerality, I mean, obviously seafood is a easy idea for this, especially something on the kind of sweet side. So I think crab would be good, which we're, I think, pretty much into crabbing season right now. If you want to go to the coast or something like that. Obviously, oysters and Sancerre, or the Sauvignon Blanc, I think do really, really well together. You almost can skip the mignonette and just have the wine instead, because it gives you that nice kind of sharp acidity, and also kind of shows the minerality off of what you're eating. I also think that the fact that this still has a good acidity, but I think it could handle a little bit of heat too. So if you do like some spicier stuff, I think that this would be an all right choice for that. Where once we jump into the Malbec in a few minutes here, it definitely is grilling, steak. When you think of Argentina, most people think of two things, which is meat and Malbec. Are there any questions about the Sauvignon Blanc? No? Cool. So meat and Malbec, I think we can just jump right in to some Malbec. Jeremy, what do you want to tell us about this?
This wine is, it's unapologetically Malbec. I think that one of the notes that you always get if you're learning to be a somm, or if you want to have a good party trick, when you smell and taste blue fruit, big blue fruit, that is always a sign of Malbec. Now, it could be Cab Franc, it could be a couple of other grapes, but you can work through it and you don't get that pyrazine. Okay, it's probably Malbec. And this is a good sign of that. It's almost like big, dry blueberry cobbler without the sugar, big and juicy. I'm a fan. this wine is what makes this wine good is I think it's all tank too. It's not, there's no oak to it, right?
Yeah,
So
and I can try that with the tech.
What's that?
I can throw the tech sheet up.
So this is, Don Silvestre is a winery that was, it's actually Hinojosa is the name of the winery. And so they started in 1962, and the gentleman was Don Silvestre. And so the Silvestre family there are some, other Silvestres out there. We actually sell one. There's another winery that he started. And I think Advantage has another winery from another Silvestre. So okay. It's a big family out there. But these guys just have a little bit of land, and they're located in Tunuyan. I think I'm saying that right, which is in the Valle de Uco. And Mendoza is huge.
Yeah.
Like as a region, as a province, it is huge. And I think it's exciting because in the realm of Malbec, for those of you that have been drinking Malbec since it became super popular, is that, when it first became popular, maybe 10 years ago, 12 years ago, it all tasted the same. It was big, it was brambly, it had that blue fruit, definitely some oak to it. But this is, we're seeing a real depth of flavor, partly because of the Zuccardi family, partly because of the Catena family, partly because of Mendavi and Paul Hobbs and those guys coming out. Like, we're seeing a real sense of place, and that's why Valle de Uco is important, and that's why Tunuyan is important. And you see, so Valle de Uco, and I think is San Carlos, Tunuyan, and Tupungato. And that is all the Valle de Uco, which means really the Uco Valley. But they're right there in Tunuyan, and that's where all of this fruit is coming from. It's all estate. And so we'll see, pay attention to your Malbec labels, because we're starting to see more than just Mendoza.
Yeah.
And we're also starting to see more flavor than just, big brambly and blue, like it's a really nice thing. We're really excited about Malbec, and it's not going anywhere anytime soon. Like, the trend is still going. I'm sure you see it like crazy.
Yeah, I mean, Argentina has the largest planting of Malbec in the world, and they brought grapes to Argentina like the 1300s or 1400s, something crazy like that, and they tried to plant them by the ocean, since they figured that Bordeaux Malbec grows here, like it's coastal influence, maritime influence. Let's see what it does. And it didn't really do anything. And then some missionaries from Chile, so Chile is like right here, they crossed over the Andes, and they planted some Malbec in Mendoza, and it took off. And the monastery and the grapes actually predate the town of Mendoza. So they've been doing wine growing for 500 plus, 600 plus years now. And we, only in maybe the last, I guess, 20 years, we've started to see, Malbec that's from Argentina, that's not just kind of like you were saying, like brambly, boring Bordeaux in style, which for the time was great. But now we're getting these nice expressions of really kind of fresh fruit. And when you say blue fruit, that's a hard term for a lot of people. In our under 10 set of the co-op, we have some little flavor kind of stickers, and blue fruit. When I first put them up, I probably had 20 questions on what is blue fruit. That's because there's not a lot of blue fruit out there. Blueberries are obviously the easy one, and I think when you described that, like non-sweet blueberry is perfect. I actually just brought some blueberries home today, and the smell of the blueberries and then smelling this wine really kind of just like slapped it all together for me. And boysenberry is another one, huckleberry. We don't really see a lot of those down here in the South. You might be able to throw mulberry in there a little bit, but that still kind of tends more purple. And it's just, so when you think of blue fruit, when you're at the co-op, take a pint of organic blueberries and just give them a big whiff, and then try to remember this wine.
I had a master somm in a class once tell me that if you don't get asked to stop playing with the fruit in a grocery store, you are not smelling enough of the things that you need to learn to smell. But listen, Zach, on that note, I'm sorry, but I don't know if you explained it to the other guys, but I have a flag football meeting that I have to go to. I'm coaching my son's flag football. And so it's a mandatory coaches meeting that starts in 2 minutes. And so I'm going to get out of the car and run inside. But thank you so much. I'm so sorry to have to run.
Thank you for joining us. It's always a pleasure when you join Wines Days. And these great wines. I'm actually going to continue talking about some Malbec, so folks, please stay tuned. Jeremy, thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you.
All right. So now it's the Zach show instead of the Zach and Jeremy show. So Malbec. When I first had Malbec, it was that, $8, $10 grocery store version. Very easy to drink. As Jeremy mentioned, brambles. So if you've ever been around a blackberry bush or a raspberry bush, and as you're picking the fresh blackberries, you kind of get a little bit of that green flavor from like just the fresh picked berries. That's like what brambly means, at least to me, is that kind of slightly green note, but not the pyrazine that Jeremy was talking about. So not the bell pepper, not the fresh cut grass, not the jalapeno, but that more of that like woody green flavor that just kind of lingers in there. And what Jeremy was saying, since Malbec originated in Bordeaux, the style of wine that folks were making in Argentina was very much that old world style, but these grapes, because it's so much hotter, get a lot riper. And so we're getting these ripe fruit flavors versus the kind of more reserved aspect of what Bordeaux typically offers, if it does have some Malbec in there. And last week when we tried the Loire Valley Malbec and Cab Franc blend, the fruit was definitely suppressed, and it was more about just the slight earthiness that it had, and there was fruit, but it was more of a secondary flavor, where in this glass is predominant. I mean, that's what you're tasting, is that nice, kind of dry blueberries. I'm gonna stick with that because I think that's exactly what's going on here. As the tech sheet showed, which I'll throw back up, there's no oak on this wine. These are aged in either stainless steel or concrete. Concrete is actually a really popular wine aging vessel. It has some porosity to it, so it allows the wines to breathe, and it also doesn't impart any flavors. It's just a nice neutral thing. They use a lot of concrete in South America, but they use it in the Loire as well. They'll typically line them with little glass tiles, and so it keeps it kind of fresh. You'll see that a lot in Muscadet, which I don't believe we've tasted a Muscadet yet, but we've got a in-store demo coming up on the 11th of September that if you're in the co-op from, I believe, 3 to 6, you can try some pretty classic Muscadet, which has that nice minerality, very similar to the Sauvignon Blanc that we're trying right now. So as you can see, the elaboration process, so how they did these things, hand-picked grapes, which Jeremy also mentioned, and they harvest on the 2nd and 3rd week of March. So in the northern hemisphere, 100 or so days after the grapes kind of bloom, then you harvest. In South America, it's opposite, and then the southern hemisphere. So Australia, New Zealand, all of these things are kind of 6 months ahead or 6 months behind, depending on how you want to look at it. So they are picking and pressing and doing all of their winemaking from March until May, versus in the northern hemisphere where we're doing September through November, just depending on the on the winery and what they're trying to do. The fact that this doesn't have any oak makes it nice and soft. There's not a big grippy tannin, which I think is pretty nice, especially makes it really easy for food pairing. This is definitely a steak or burger wine, where for me the last month has been pretty hot to grill, and now that we're kind of getting some cooler weather, I think that this is going to be an easy thing to grab. So to answer Alexander, your question, both of these wines are handpicked, which, in really big wineries, they'll use commercial pickers, which are like machines that kind of go over the rows and just grab everything, leaves, full clusters of grape, unripened, over-ripened, just kind of everything. And depending on the winery, they'll either then hand sort everything. So it might be, gathered by machine, but then sorted by hand. Or they'll just throw it all into the tank and ferment it and call it wine. And then they have to do more winemaking techniques, acidification. If the, fruit was too ripe, they'll actually add some acid back into it. If it doesn't have enough Brix level, so the sugar level, they'll chapitalize it. So they'll actually add some sugars to it, typically in the form of grape must, but some more inexpensive wines will use things like beet sugars, or just, even like just kind of table sugar, just to get that balance in check. I try not to sell a lot of those wines. There are inevitably some, typically in the under 10 section. If you've ever bought a unnamed $3 bottle of wine, it was probably very manipulated in order to be, kind of perfect each time. It might not necessarily be your thing, or it might have been your thing, 10 years ago or whatever. Yeah, exactly. It's, the thing with bulk winemaking is you can't have the control as if you're doing something on a much smaller scale. There's vineyards in Germany, which we tried a Mosel Riesling a couple of weeks ago, where they can't use machinery to pick because the hills of the vineyards are too steep, that they can't literally get a machine down there, or they have not necessarily train tracks, but these things where they lower like on a pulley, and then people are in this little kind of mini tractor, but attached to a rope, if you will, and they hand pick like that, just because the hills are so incredibly steep. You will find some hilly elevation in Mendoza, which is what makes the wine kind of good. It's what from Chile is on the west side, then you have the Andes, and then you have Mendoza. And what that creates is a rain shadow. And what you have is the Pacific coast will throw water onto Chile, and then the Andes kind of, it'll go over and kind of hold in there. So they're not having to use typically a lot of irrigation, and you're kind of getting the runoff from the Andes versus having to do a lot of watering, or you're having flood irrigation. If there's absolutely no water, they will literally flood the vineyards one time with 6 inches of water, and that's all the water the grapes get for the entire year, and everything else they kind of have to struggle for and fight for. And what that does is it makes the vines kind of concentrate their fruit. So instead of having a whole bunch of kind of floppy, flaccid grapes that don't have a lot of flavor, you're getting a smaller yield, and you're getting, 1 or 2 bunches of grapes that are really, really intense. And that usually will, in the, hands of the right winemaker, will turn into some really great wine. Yeah, what's your question, Lynn? You have to unmute yourself. There you go.
Yeah, Ed and I are both doing it at the same time. Two questions about your tech sheet. I've never heard of a cement pool before. Can you describe that?
Sure. So typically, for cement, you'll have a few things. They literally mean just like an outside swimming pool. And then they'll usually cover it. Sometimes they do open vat, and they'll have what's called like pump over or punch down. So as you're throwing squished grapes into this vat, which kind of, you can imagine a swimming pool, it's typically more cylindrical than, more barrel-like than, really wide open and rectangular, but you'll have what's called the cap. And as the grape skins and the seeds and all that kind of float to the top. They form like a really thick layer, and depending on the winemaker, they will punch it down. So they'll literally get in there and break the cap up, and that will help distribute the skins so that the wine has more contact with the watery part, if you will, of the wine. So you get the tannins, you get the color. All of that is from the skins of the grapes, with the exception of, I want to say, 3 varietals that have colored flesh, not just colored skin. And then they also do what's called pump over. So they'll take wine from the bottom, or fermenting wine from the bottom, and literally pump it over the top. But these, you can imagine the cement vessel as just a big barrel. It just happens to be made out of cement instead of stainless steel, or instead of wood, or instead of whatever, other vessel. Amphorae are the classic clay vessels that they used to put wine in, and they would kind of stack them in the bottom of ships. And that was in the Grecian and Roman times is how they would kind of move wine around. There are some people who are still using amphora or amphorae to age wines, because they, again, it's the winemaker's decision, but they can add texture just because you've got a smaller barrel or a smaller vessel, so you've got more contact and kind of more surface area, if you will, much like the different sizes of barrels, Barrique at 225 liters all the way up to like Foudre, which can be thousands of liters, that people can literally stand up inside of a barrel. But you've got different surface areas of the exposure. So, but yeah, the cement is an easy thing. A lot of times they'll be egg shaped as well. And people feel like because it has that kind of odd oval shape, that it'll help with the kind of contact and the stirring of the wine. So does that help?
That does, and I'm wondering, as you describe it, were our cement pools perhaps more less expensive because you don't have to replace them with wooden vats?
Sure. So, again, winemaker choice. I would say that if people are using really, really big wood things, they will last for hundreds of years. You don't get any oak flavor at that point. It's more of like the breathability of wood, and instead of like imparting the oaky tannins and the oak flavors, it's what's called neutral oak, or second use or third use. So they do have a longevity. It's more of for cement and for stainless, you can put it in, you can wash it out, and then you're ready to go again. So I would say that it has, probably a higher sustainability. But if you're using concrete, you can do things like put an oak stave in your wine, which a lot of the wines that I deal with don't do that. But instead of using a barrel, you can just throw in, wood chips or, that kind of stuff.
That helps. Thank you.
Sure. So Alexander, your question, does Argentina have a similar France? And so like, as far as certification, do you mean the AOC that we talked about? As the fact that it says Mendoza on the label is the kind of, you've got Argentina, you've got Mendoza, and then you've got, the Valle de Uco, which is what Jeremy was talking about. And then even further, you've got the Tununian, which is even kind of smaller. So it's not necessarily, I don't think they have the wine laws in place that France does. So it's up to the winemakers. A lot of old world wine, like we talked about, has the place listed on it and not the makeup. Where most New World wines, instead of having if you see Valle de Uco, then you should assume it's Malbec, but it doesn't have to be 100%. But they will go ahead and just say like, this is 100% Malbec, or 90% Malbec and 10% Cabernet, or 10% Merlot, just to give it what the winemaker is kind of aiming for. And typically, if you see more like smaller zoom ins, if you will, of the place, then you are also typically paying a little more because you can guarantee that it's not just Mendoza, this giant thing, but it's this tiny little town or this, one estate in Mendoza. But this wine is great. It's, less than 15 at the co-op. I think it's a really nice example of unoaked Malbec that is very, very typical, which is, what I was going for when I pulled this in. Maggie has a question as well. So back to concrete, does it impart any calcium into the wine, or is there a coating on the concrete? So in Loire, at least, they will, line the concrete with glass. So they have these little tiny 1-inch tiles, or 2.5 centimeters if you want to be Euro about it, and they will literally line the insides of the concrete with. I would imagine that this has some kind of lining to it, but I don't know. I would have to, next time I talk to Jeremy, I'll ask him. As far as the calcium absorption, I would imagine that it's, if there is some transfer, it would be negligible. It wouldn't be like, this is going to be better for your teeth to drink this, concrete aged wine. It might be. I'll have to do some digging for that. So that would be my 2 cents, though. As far as it's more about the fact that concrete can still breathe some versus like a big plastic container that won't breathe, and the fact that they've got some some openness to it versus just like a lid on top, so they're letting it kind of purposely, ferment and do its thing. And then typically to age out, they'll throw it into stainless, kind of finish the process and not let it become oxidized. Wine's biggest, 2 biggest enemies, if you will, are light and oxygen. So if you can keep, the cool, damp cellar is because light is a very bad thing to start breaking down beer, wine, most things. You leave them outside, you start to get some, kind of funky things developing, and it's the light that's doing a lot of it. Temperature control, sure, but I would be more cautious to put things in a darker place if you can. Or at least not in total direct sunlight, unless you're drinking, frequently, then it won't be as detrimental. All right. Does anybody have any other questions tonight? No, go ahead, Ed.
You can hear me now. May I go back to the Sauvignon Blanc?
Sure, yeah, please.
Jeremy kept referring to the Sancerre relationship. So this Sauvignon Blanc is in a similar region because you can pick up a little of the Sancerre taste, but Sancerre is far more dry than this is. Would that be a correct assumption?
If something is labeled Sancerre, I would expect a little more acidity and a little less fruit. There are riper versions of Sancerre, like what Jeremy was talking about that he was tasting today. I do think that climate change is affecting some of those things too, because your riper fruit is going to be riper, in the glass or in the winemaking process. Where these grapes are coming from is to the east of Sancerre, between Sancerre and Chablis, and what Jeremy mentioned with the Saint-Brie, which I've carried a Saint-Brie in the past, but it's kind of an oddball, because when you think of white Burgundy, you're typically thinking of only Chardonnay and then maybe Aligoté, which again is another varietal that I've had in the past, but it's doesn't have the notoriety that Chardonnay does with white Burgundies. But the similarity with the Sophie Sauvignon Blanc versus Sancerre, I think, is pretty close compared to if you were to go all the way to New Zealand or California or even Argentina or Chile. You're getting more acid driven and less fruit versus where in New Zealand and in California, you're getting these kind of rounder, lower acidity wines that have a much more rich ripeness to them, and can kind of almost lean more stone fruit versus citrus fruits. And like in New Zealand, obviously grapefruit is the big marker, but you can also get really tropical with pineapple, almost kind of guava sometimes. And there's not a lot of that. If anything, it's kind of like a limey, zippy acidity, that limestone, and a little bit of that flintiness, and then that just the crispness of it all.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Lynn.
You are referring to New Zealand wines as being, or white wines as being grapefruity.
Mhm.
Is that because there's a lot of grapefruit grown in New Zealand? Or
No,
are you
it's,
just talking?
it's more just how the grape presents itself in New Zealand. The interesting thing, I'll have to listen to that podcast that Jeremy mentioned about the mechanical harvesting versus hand harvesting, and then the difference that can offer. But for me, when I smell New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, one of our personal favorites here at the house is Frenzy. So I think if you do want to taste Sauvignon Blanc before we do it for Wines Day here in a month or so, then I think that's one to pick up. But it does, have that like grapefruit zest flavor to it that I don't find in any other areas. There is a Chilean Sauvignon Blanc that we carry that has a little bit of it, but it's not just that intense, like fresh squeezed grapefruit juice and like crack open a jalapeno and smell it, or a little bit of that kind of grassiness that they get. I'm not getting any of those kind of flavors in this glass, but they're exactly the same grapes. They're just grown on opposite sides of the world.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Right. Are there any other questions today?
What does like dumping over the grapes versus like pushing them down do as far as like the flavor profile of the wine?
That's more winemaker decision. I met a master of wine who happens to be a winemaker, and she hand punches down. So she literally gets in like this deep, and she pushes the grape skins through and kind of breaks them up. It's all about the surface area. So if you've got a squished grape, it's like squish. You've got that surface area, but they're floating on top. So punching it down kind of redistributes that cap. And it kind of comes, more like applesauce consistency versus liquid with, kind of a floaty thing on top. And so you mush those back down, and then it kind of gets all of the skins wet again. So that way they impart the tannins from the skins in the pit, and then, can help extract those flavors versus it just kind of drying out on top and not getting that exposure. Pumping over is the same kind of thing, but you're pumping over something that is then kind of trickling through versus mixing it all up again. So it's more winemaker decision, but that's the whole reason to do it. Rosés, they typically don't have a lot of skin contact. That's why they're pink instead of purple or blue or whatnot. So, and there's different ways to make those. You've got Sangé, which like to bleed. So they just squish the grapes, and whatever color comes out of them that's the color that it is in the bottle, which are typically really, really light pink. It's also really rare because you don't get the color, and people, when they look at rosé, they do want some kind of pink color to it versus white with a hint of oranginess to it. Or you've got skin contact for a couple of days, especially in Tavel, which we've got a couple on the shelf right now, which is like really red. It's almost like a light-bodied red wine because of that skin contact, and they want that rich kind of almost tannic rosé to versus something really light and kind of citrusy like you find from Provence. So not to tangent on rosés, but I think as far as skin contact, that is an easy way that you can like have something from Provence, which is peachy salmon colored, and then having something from Tavel, which is like really almost purpley red. Cool. Well, thank you very much, everybody. If there's no other questions tonight, that will wrap up this edition of Wines Day. Our next Wines Day is in 2 weeks, which, let me open my calendar real quick. Should be September 1st. We're gonna have some cool new wines. These wines will still be available on top of the cheese cooler until Monday of next week, and then we'll put the new wines out. And we look forward to everybody joining next time. All right. Have a good night. Thank you.
Yeah.